You can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. To hear the latest episode, just say, play the news from The Australian.
From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, August 16. A shortage of intravenous fluids, including saline, has been causing chaos in Australian hospitals, with patients at risk from dehydration and other complications. Regulators claim it's a global shortage, but sources say Australia has failed to procure vital supplies. That's an exclusive, live now at theaustralian.com.au. A Labor scheme to get more aged care workers into Australia is off to a slow start. Fewer than 500 visas have been granted in the program's first year, and of those, only 84 were given to offshore applicants. The aged care sector is still facing critical staff shortages. In 2015, our podcast, The Alibi, investigated the unsolved murder of Denise Govendir, a Sydney mother brutally beaten to death in her own home. Her husband, Aaron Govendir, told police a home invader had knocked him unconscious and bound him with cable ties before killing Denise. Now, Aaron has been charged with murder. Today, why this 26-year-old cold case is back before the courts.
Aaron.
Yes.
Hello, my name's Yoni Bashan. I'm a reporter with the Sunday Telegraph. How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Were you expecting me by any chance?
No.
That's our reporter Yoni Bashan in 2015 attempting to talk to a man named Aaron Govendir. He was a widower and his wife Denise, the mother of their children, had been brutally beaten to death in her own home many years earlier.
I'm writing a story about your wife, Denise.
Please don't. Come on.
I'm writing a story about Denise's murder.
Stella.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions if you're available. Just a couple of questions.
It's been 9 years since Yoni knocked on that door. And now, this.
There's been a cold case breakthrough today, some 26 years in the making. An 81-year-old man arrested over the alleged murder of his wife, Denise Govendir.
This morning, Aaron Govendir will face a court charged with Denise's murder, more than 26 years after her death. He's not been required to enter a plea and will likely defend the charge. No evidence has yet been brought before a court, but on Thursday afternoon, Yoni broke the story on theaustralian.com.au that Aaron Govendir had been charged. The audio you just heard was first aired in a podcast Yoni and I produced in 2015. Back then, we were both working at the Sunday Telegraph, just one floor upstairs from where we both work today at The Australian. The podcast is called The Alibi. It was in the early days of true crime podcasting, and although Yoni and I were experienced newspaper journalists, we were excited about this new way we could bring our stories to new audiences. This was one of Australia's first investigative podcasts. Yoni, when we made The Alibi, we didn't really know that much about how to make podcasts. We even hit up one of your friends, Josh Conn, a talented musician, to compose the theme music for us. That's what we're playing now. We kind of did what we would do if we were doing this for the newspaper, but turned it into audio. We recorded everything we did. It was a real learning curve, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a very unusual time. It was 2015. There was a very popular podcast overseas called Serial, which I hadn't heard yet. And I remember coming to you and saying, look, I've got this interesting idea to investigate a cold case murder and doing it in some meticulous detail. And I remember your response was like, why don't we do it as a podcast? And I think I might have even said, what's a podcast? But it was a really enjoyable learning experience. It was an unusual way to explore the details of an unsolved crime. And it was also a highly effective way of doing it because we know that the police listened to it. We know that they followed our coverage in the years afterwards. And we know that ultimately it led to an independent investigation of this particular murder, and that led to where we are today.
Govendir devoted her life to helping battered women. Last night, Mrs. Govendir became the victim of violence, bashed to death during an apparent home invasion at Dover Heights.
By 2015, when we released the Alibi, Denise's murder was a 17-year-old cold case. She'd been murdered in 1998 in her own bedroom. Aaron Govendir told police in an interview recorded about 2 months later of a terrifying encounter in that home in Dover Heights, a suburb overlooking the cliffs just north of Bondi Beach. Here's a bit of our podcast, The Alibi. We included some of Aaron's police interview, and then you'll hear Yoni's voice from episode 1.
I lifted the pillow and I could see blood, and I thought, oh shit, and I came in and rang Triple O again, and asked for an ambulance and police, because they'd hurt her. I felt her arm. I didn't know where to feel a pulse with her right arm. It was all floppy. I picked it up, it was all floppy.
Now, Aaron wouldn't talk to me, but that was him speaking to police about 2 months after Denise's murder. So, Aaron has been the victim of a terrible crime. His wife has been murdered, and even worse, he's living with the fact that police at some point have investigated the theory that he was the killer, though he's never been charged. His story has always been the same. He and his wife were victims of a home invasion. But there's no getting away from the fact that Aaron's account doesn't answer some pretty big questions. Like how the house at first looked like the scene of a robbery, yet nothing of value was taken. Or why the killer stole the family car and then dumped it down the road. And here's another one. The cable ties used to bind both Denise and Aaron were identical to those sold under the brand name Landia, which could only be purchased from one hardware chain in the country, and the nearest one was located just down the road from the Govendir family home. But above all, there's this. Why would anyone want to kill Denise Govendir?
All right. Afternoon, everyone. Detective Superintendent Danny Doherty, Commander of the Homicide Squad, State Crime Command.
This is the New South Wales Police's Homicide Squad Commander, Danny Doherty.
About 10:15am today, Strike Force detectives arrested an 81-year-old man at Springwood Police Station, where he has been now charged with 1 count of murder.
After we broke the story on The Australian, Danny Doherty revealed more details about how Aaron Govendir was arrested.
This is a hard slog of an investigation. This is 26 years in the making, including the original investigation, and looking at the evidence with fresh eyes, but building on the evidence that had already been obtained and re-interviewing certain witnesses, gaining information from members of the public, re-interviewing other people. Gaining new medical evidence is important, and also gaining new forensic evidence. So in totality, it's formed a very convincing and compelling circumstantial brief of evidence, and which we will put to the court that this person who was arrested and charged today was the sole person responsible for Denise's murder.
What police will allege when this matter gets to trial is that Aaron Govendir staged the break-in, murdered Denise himself, cable-tied her, and then made up a story that someone had broken in, claiming to be a police officer, and knocked Aaron unconscious.
We will allege there was a stage robbery just to cover the tracks, allegedly, of what's been committed, which was a murder. In essence, a domestic violence murder. And that's important that it was never lost on us that this is a woman that lost her life finally in our own home. That's been something that's driven and motivated the investigators from day one, since 1998. What we're alleging in the facts in relation to this matter, and I've got to be careful because it is before the court, but what we're alleging in the facts was that there was no break-in, there was no bogus police officer. The circumstances which we'll outline was that this man was responsible for violently assaulting Denise and then staged a robbery in terms of putting things out in the place to make it look like a robbery, when in fact nothing was actually stolen. No valuable items were ever stolen. There were circumstances that were inconsistent with versions provided, and even the car going missing and only being found a short distance away was quite unusual. And all these circumstances, on top of other things we allege in the facts, we believe make it compelling that this person should be charged with her murder.
Doherty revealed Aaron Govendir attended Springwood Police Station near his home for another reason: to find detectives waiting for him.
Yeah, it was under an unrelated matter, and he was met by the investigators by the unsolved homicide team. So His reaction was quite emotionless, which is unusual, and he was then placed in custody and charged. So whether he had a sense of maybe the inevitable has happened, maybe that's something that we could infer, but he was quite emotionless.
On Thursday, you spoke to Danny Doherty in an interview after he'd spoken to the rest of the journos. What did he have to say?
There are some limitations in terms of what he can say because we're waiting for the suspect in this matter, Aaron Govendir, to actually go before a court and to apply for bail and for a police statement of facts to be tendered. So there are some things that can be said at a high level, but generally speaking, what was quite fascinating about my conversation with Superintendent Doherty was just a little bit of the insight into what police have actually been doing these past few years. So I've obviously been following this case for a very long time. I've noticed that it's kind of ticked along in a very gradual, very slow fashion, and I've always wondered, what are the detectives actually doing? And what I was able to glean from Superintendent Doherty was that much of this work is just so protracted. It involves reinvestigating every line of inquiry that existed at the time and re-interviewing witnesses, and not just family and friends of Aaron Govendir or Denise Govendir, but also going back and interviewing the old detectives who started this case and built the foundations of this case back in the late 90s. But I guess one of the more fascinating and unexpected aspects of the investigation that I wasn't aware of was that the detectives were, in a way, waging a slow burn, simmering game of psychological warfare with their target. And I guess we see this in films from time to time, that you bring the suspect in, you grill them, you give them a break, you grill them again. That's kind of what they were doing. They, at a certain point last year, they turned up at Aaron Govendir's property. There'd been very little publicity about this case. They raid the property, toss it over, collect some items of interest, slap him with some very small-scale charges. He's ordered to go off to court. I mean, this is all pressure. This is legal pressure that mounts on a person. Then you pull them in, you subject them to questions, you let them know that you're the target of an investigation. And slowly, you're asking questions of this person to ascertain, are they still cleaving to the same story they told in 1998, or are they changing their version of events? And I think that was the insight that Superintendent Doherty provided to me, that it wasn't necessarily a smoking gun that blew open this case. It's a collection of small pieces of evidence that all cobble together to form a circumstantial brief that will ultimately go before the court.
Coming up, another cold case murder with an intriguing connection to this story. That's coming up next. Our subscribers are always the first to know. Join us at theaustralian.com.au and we'll be back after this break. I told you earlier, our podcast from 2015 was called The Alibi. So, what did that mean? Well, Aaron Govendir had been caught up in an earlier murder case, this time the wife of a close friend of his. Eva Wiebel was found bashed to death inside her home 15 years before Denise's death. That was in 1983. Her husband, George Wiebel, was charged with murder. And when the matter came to trial, George brought to court an alibi witness for his whereabouts at the time of Eva's murder. His friend, Aaron Govendir, said he had called George at a different premises at the exact time of the murder and spoken to him on the phone. George Wiebel's lawyers argued this was crucial evidence that proved he was not guilty. George Wiebel was acquitted, and he later spoke to Yoni for our podcast.
Look, the case will never be solved.
Why not?
Because the coppers arrested me. They had me on the rouse for 2 years or thereabouts. And after that, bloody thing has gone so cold it's not even funny. And there's just no way that they'll find anything.
In that conversation, Yoni asked George Wiebel about the dreadful luck that saw two close families struck by similar tragedies. The fact his close friend, his alibi, Aaron, subsequently lost his wife in a violent murder in her own home. Eva Wiebel and Denise Govendir were friends, just as Aaron Govendir and George Wiebel were.
I don't know. I don't know. Look, I don't gamble. I don't gamble, and I don't try to find odds. It's happened. I don't know why it's happened. I don't know why the first one's happened. I don't know why the second one's happened. I don't know who did it. And I just want to get on with my life. As simple as that. Look, I honestly can't see how I can be interested in this bloody case.
Yoni Bashan is a journalist with The Australian. Thanks for joining us on The Front. Our team is Stephanie Coombs, Joshua Burton, Leah Tsamaglu, Tiffany Dimmack, Jasper Leake, Kristen Amiot and me, Claire Harvey. Don't forget to check out all our journalism 24/7 at theaustralian.com.au.